Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Portland Children's Levy Allocation Committee meeting. I'm Ted Wheeler. I'm the mayor and the Allocation Committee chair. What?
Microphone.
What about my mic?
It's not on.
Now does it work? Okay. I don't control the on or off. It's the funny thing. So I'd like to introduce the committee members. On my left is Multnomah County Commissioner Jessica Vega-Peterson, and Felicia Tripp-Folsom is a little farther. She's our county-appointed member, Julie Young, who's appointed by the city of Portland, and of course, Mitch Horniker, our business community representative, is here with us today. We have the PCL staff here, and the first item on our agenda is approving the minutes of our June 17th meeting. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Please call the roll. I'll call the roll. Is there any objection? Good, done. Before we begin, I want to take a few moments to recognize our colleague, Julie Young. Da-da-da. She will be stepping off of the, wow, now it's really loud. Voice of God. Julie Young will be leaving us, and on behalf of the city, I want to thank you for your 7 years of dedicated service to the Children's Levy and the families. There's no question that your participation here has led to many, many good things for people in our community, and I want to thank you. We're going to miss you, but obviously you're not going anywhere. You'll still be here in the community. You'll still be very active, and I want to wish you the best of luck in the years ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I'd love it if other people had anything they wanted to add.
I just want to say it's been a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for me to be able to have this experience. And I know one of the things that comes to mind really is gratitude for the city of Portland, the voters of Portland, for doing this for the children. All the people working in organizations have my greatest respect. My colleagues on this dais, which have changed over the years, and certainly the Children's Levy staff, who've been really great to work with. It's been really like a graduate course for me that I didn't have to pay tuition for.
Best kind. Very good. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. And we're going to kick things off. We have a fun update here on a recent levy committee project. John Laughlin and Mary Gay are going to talk a little bit about it. Hello.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So last winter, the Levy embarked on a mural project. We thought a mural project would be a great way to involve the grantee partner, the community where that grantee resides, the families and children that they serve. So we found a wonderful partner with Hacienda CDC. They had a perfect wall for us. It was a wall that faces east on 68th and Northeast 68th and Killingsworth at their Salon Communal Building, which is just a block down from their main office. And so it was so they were willing to meet with us, and so we sat down, started meeting with them really in the winter. It was a long process. We worked with the city permitting office. We worked with the Northeast Neighborhood Coalition, which represents the Cullen neighborhood. We literally sat down at the table, many table meetings, talking about what kind of mural we wanted it to be. Oh, that works. We wanted it to be something that was affirming and respectful and positive and empowering to that whole community. And so we brought staff in, we brought neighborhood people in. It's in the Vista de Rosas apartments. There was folks from residing there. So we all sat down and then we worked with a wonderful organization called Ideal PDX. It's a group of Latino artists led by the fabulous William Hernandez, and he was the lead artist on this. So during these months, we kind of formulated what kind of art and what the mural would represent. It was a big structure. It was 48 by 10 feet. And so it emerged and it took shape, and during the week of August 12th, what worked out really well is the Levy funds the after-school program in that building, and we also fund a summer camp in that building. So during that week, the children that were in that camp, participated with the artists. And so they did all the work that was from yay high on down. And then the artists were on the ladders working on the taller features. And it was a beautiful depiction. What we came up with was figures that represented immigrants coming to America, coming to Portland, bringing their skills, their talents, their gifts to Portland, and what those hopes represent, and then passing that along to future generations and to their children. And that culminated in a August 16th mural unveiling, and we had lots of people there. We had wonderful food, we had games, henna and face painting, and it was a great celebration, and a lot of people showed up. And it was really, we hope it's going to be an asset to the community and a legacy for the Levy and for the artist that will live on for a while. So, and John did amazing videos and social media work that week, and he's going to have some, he has some videos to show you and some pictures.
Yeah, we're working on a longer video to tell the whole story, but this is just one of the short, like, little teasers, interviewing one of the artists. So this was a little series of teasers, so it's very, very quick.
Kids are always drawing and they use little papers, and suddenly having the opportunity to show them here, work with people that are very experienced, and you're going to put your work in there and it's going to stay there, and then maybe years later when you walk by, you'll say, I paint that flower. I think that's really nice. We live in a world where there are so many stereotypes of how we need to live, of how we are supposed to look. So having a mural that is showing someone with your color, someone that looks like you, someone that dresses like you, in something beautiful, I think it's very important, and I think we don't have enough of that. We should have more. So I think it's a win-win situation for the kids, for the artists, for the city.
Okay. All right. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great. All right, next up is public comment on non-agenda items. Is there any non-agenda items? Come on up. It's good to see you.
Hi, Jay. Hello, my name is Jay Bloom, and I'm a volunteer at this point. And I'm wearing the hat today of the Age-Friendly Steering Committee, as well as ARP State Executive Council. And it was 26 years ago that I was recruited to come to this community to work at Morrison Child and Family Services. And I can still remember the day that Dan Salzman came into my office saying he had this wonderful idea for a children's levy. And I'm just so impressed by how well it's unfolded over these various years. Mitch, I got a little anecdote for you that you can bring back to Meyer, because I was telling Lisa earlier and a couple of others, when it was first started, we were very involved in early childhood at Morrison. And we were able to get the Children's Levy to put up a challenge grant of $500,000 for a pilot program in early childhood. And Meyer was going to match it, and at the end, the trustees, you weren't on there at that time, turned it down because they didn't think the Children's Levy would keep going. And they have kept going and thrived ever since. But my message today is, as part of an age-friendly city, we encourage you to use an intergenerational lens as you're thinking about your work. Increasingly, age-friendly is a perspective about seeing all adults and children as assets in our community. And there are a number of programs out there that already have an intergenerational perspective, whether they be Experience Corps, SMART, SAGE has a great program, Bridge Meadows. These are programs that are also utilizing that older adults in their programming. And please, if you can, encourage your staff to think about that as a possible lens, because Portland is getting older and we still have a lot to contribute. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate it. Okay, let's see. There's no welcome comment. First agenda item. Lisa and John are going to discuss levy resources and recommended allocations between the program areas for the upcoming levy. And then after taking questions, we'll open up the opportunity for public discussion on this particular item. Good afternoon, Lisa.
Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you all, and I'm glad that we got a chance to see a video so we could remember why we're all here, to think about the kids and put them front and center. We're going to try to make that our practice at meetings from here on out. So back to brass tacks and money matters. As we approach the funding round, we're anticipating starting the funding round at the end of this month, so we're making sort of the final set of decisions before we do that. And one of the first things we have to do, or one of the last things I should say we have to do before we do that, is divide, set approximate levels of resources for each program area. This is something we have done typically before every competitive funding round and is now required in the ballot language that has authorized the levy, which codified some of our past practices. Among those things in the new act, it's called an act, that was passed by City Council, referring our measure to the voters, we are required to allocate no more than 35% of resources to any one program area. We're required to allocate money in each program area. All 6 have to be funded. Up to 10% of available resources can be allocated for non-competitive grants, for special initiatives that address multiple program areas, for quality improvement supports, training and technical assistance for funded programs, and to improve systems that affect children and organizations that serve them. So there is that 10% in that category, and we'll talk a little bit more about the kind of things that fall into there. John will go over that when he talks about resources. So that's sort of the overall parameters around allocating your funding between program areas. John's going to give you an overview of the resources, what we expect to have, and what those are based on, what our assumptions and projections are based on.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, our team looked at the funds on a 10-year time horizon. Even though we're funded for only 5, we wanted to think, okay, let's be sure we're sustainable. We don't want things to drop off a cliff after 5 if the levy's renewed. So we came up with this number, $68.7 million for the next 3 years. So that's the number we're going to put out, or we're recommending be put out in the RFI for the competitive funding. So that includes, in that number is $9 million, just a little over $9 million in fund balance. So over the preceding years, despite our best efforts to spend all the money, we don't always get it out the door. And so we've got funds that are sitting there, and our plan is to get those out in a steady way. We wouldn't want to put those all out at once. So we've got, in this next 3-year period, putting out $9 million of those dollars. And then, as Lisa mentioned, we also have the Small Grants Fund, which is competitive funds, and that's a set aside of about $1 million. And then it's the non-competitive funds that Lisa mentioned earlier, and then administrative expenses. Do we have? No. Okay, so I'm going to say a couple other things that aren't on the slides. Projected tax collections are, which we get that figure from the city economists, are about $72 million over the next 3 years. And those have been pretty reliable historically, barring major disruptions like happened in 2008. And interestingly, it took about 3 or 4 years for that to hit us. Some of you may have been around. We were fine, and then we had to actually reduce grants at that point. About $1 million, as I mentioned, for small grants, and setting aside a little under 10% of available funds for non-competitive grants. We did a look at what are the things that are out there, and the things that you all know about that we currently do. The Community Child Care Initiative is significant. That's about $1.6 million this year, and we are talking about continuing in that vein. Things like training and technical assistance, quality improvement work, system improvement work, and then, of course, the 10% for the non-competitive. And so we anticipate about $3.6 million in admin spending over the next few years, and that will keep our admin, of course, under the 5%. 4.78% is the number we're shooting for through 2023, fiscal 2023. Questions on that? No? Okay.
Okay, no questions on mobile. Okay, so I'll move on to, if you want to switch the slide.
Yep, I'm here.
You can,
Is that
do you
one?
mind being my slide
Yeah.
switcher? Yes,
that
okay.
one, or-
I think,
no, you're here.
no, I think we
Yeah,
want to
I
go
got you.
back one.
I got
Okay,
you, yep.
thanks, yeah. Okay, so dividing, so that sets the stage for available resources, looking at that 68.7 million in competitive funding. Now your job today is to try to figure out how to divide that up in the RFIs. We try to give people a sense of how much money is in that program area because that helps inform people in figuring out what their requests are going to be. So in developing staff recommendations for how to apportion those resources, we looked at three primary things. The first of which is what you see on the screen there, and that is what was done over the last 6 years. So those percentages you see reflected there are a combination of actual expenditures in the last 5-year periods that have been closed, and then the renewal grants that you just made for 1 year, which those are just grants. They haven't been spent yet, obviously, because we're just not quite done with the first quarter. So it's a little bit of a mix between actuals and budgets, if you will. So that gives you a sense of how resources have been divided. And I will mention that, because I realize that many of you actually now at this point were not here last time during the last 5-year levy period. Early childhood was higher in that period when we had additional resources and the committee came together to allocate those resources. They allocated a significant amount to early childhood expansion of existing programs. So that's partly why that percentage was higher in that period. So we looked at that, and we also looked at you can switch to the next one, the community engagement results. If you recall, when Kiyoshi Owens was here delivering results on their community engagement survey, one of the things they surveyed on was people's preferences for investment areas. What did they rate the highest? What did they think was the most important to them? So I want you to take this, in its context. It was 500 people that responded to that survey, so that is a part of our community, but it is not, the entire community. But people's preferences are reflected here, and these are the average ranks. People were asked to rank the areas, the program areas that we fund in 1 to 6. So as you can see, early childhood is the highest. Hunger relief and child abuse are very close, next in line, and then after-school mentoring and foster care. So that gives you a sense of what the community who responded to that survey thought. So we looked at that, and we also looked at a number of other policy factors. So one of which was not recommending huge shifts in investment areas because we didn't really see reason for that, and there wasn't really much support for that in any of the factors we looked at. We wanted to assure that each of the program areas received some portion of the projected additional resources. So we are imagining having about 5.66 million extra above annual investment level. So our current annual investments are about 7.24. We're imagining having approximately 5.66 more than that each year for that 3-year period. So that gives you some scaling on the extra at least that we're projected, again, assuming the economist is correct. We wanted to assure early childhood investment remains the single largest investment category, both because it's number 1 on the list in the community that was surveyed, and also because it's usually the best bet for improving outcomes down the line. We wanted to concentrate additional resources in child abuse and hunger relief, since those were highly prioritized in the community. We also thought there were some policy reasons for increasing the level of investment in child abuse, because there's a new strategy there to be funded. If you recall, you all approved in response to community engagement results, a strategy that's going to support more family stabilization to stay out of the child welfare system. We also had the transportation was such a huge theme, and in after-school, transportation tends to be the most expensive because it serves the largest number of kids. If there's additional transportation dollars, that's going to likely increase people's requests. And then we wanted to, of course, ensure that nobody had more than 35% of the available funds, so that was reflected in our recommendations. And we wanted to assure that each program area, if you will, had enough investment remaining in it, such that they could sustain the current level of investment plus some projection for inflation. So you never know what inflation is going to be. Can't, tell you what that percentage will be. And also keeping in mind that people's expenses often go up faster than the inflation rate due to many other factors locally. So thinking about that to make sure that there was additional resources in each category to absorb that so that we're not decreasing our investment in any particular program area. So we looked at all of those factors to come up the numbers that you see on the slide today, and which are on the backs of the agendas for the folks who are here. So those were the percentage recommendations that we are making. 31% for early childhood, 20% for child abuse, 19 for after school, 11 for hunger, 10 for foster care, and 9 for mentoring. So that preserves and accomplishes all of those objectives that I just went through. So obviously people's priorities can be different. One thing to keep in mind with those, I lost that point, sorry. Well, if I think of it, I'll let you know. It just flew right out of my head. Oh, I know what it was. Small adjustments. So to keep in mind, these are guidelines. You're going to divide up these resources and put them in the RFIs. When you come to make your final decisions, you're going to have a field of applicants, and you're going to have scores, you're going to have a lot of other data and information in front of you. You can make, and the committee last time did make, small adjustments of funds based on what the pool of applicants were in these different program areas. So it's not set in stone. We always say this is approximately the resource in this category. But I want you to keep that in mind, that it's possible to shift resources based on what comes in the door, because you never can project who and how many people will apply in any given category. So that's a large mouthful. Any questions before I step away? No? Okay.
Thank you, appreciate it.
You can move that up, yeah.
All right, we're ready to take public comment. We're going to let Jay Bloom be the only person
Come on, people.
who speaks today. All right, very good. Then if there's no further discussion, are we ready to vote on that guidance? I'll entertain a motion.
People have discussion or questions or anything?
Mitch, did you have further questions?
Yeah,
Good, go for it.
I'd just like to, I first like to thank the staff for doing such a great job. And I thought the memo was really helpful, and it's so nice to know that we have some more money to spread around. I guess we can thank the local economy for that. If we can't thank it for a lot of other problems it's created for us. But I'd like to advocate for a larger percentage to go to foster care. As I think about foster kids, every one of the kids that receive PCL funding is deserving. Foster kids have been traumatized in their biological household many times. They've been failed by the state, and tragically, many times they are again failed by their foster parents. They have nowhere else to turn except to the state or the public for support. They have no other support system, and they are truly wards of our community. I think we've been reading about all of the missteps from shipping them out of state, the hardest ones to serve, to overworked social workers who can't keep up with their caseloads, et cetera, et cetera. And I just feel like with all of that background, I would like to see more of these new dollars moved into the foster care category.
Got a question?
I was just curious if you had any suggestions on how you would like to see the reallocation look.
Yeah. Curses, I was hoping you were going to ask me.
And I was going to use for scaling people, just to, so as people try to think through this, 1% would be $687,000. So if you move 1%, that's about the amount of money you're moving.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I mean,
Sometimes it's
for-
easier to keep track that way, for me.
For me, I guess, I don't have a hard number, but I wouldn't be troubled at all if child abuse after school and foster care were on par in terms of what we're spending annually. However that would work out with the math, I dare not attempt it in my head.
My thoughts on that, and I absolutely agree that children who are experiencing life away from their families, this is really a dilemma, and it's not something that we've done a good job in how to address. At the same time, I continue to think that it's really important that we keep our eye on going upstream and work and providing services to children in early childhood and in the child abuse prevention area to prevent those foster care situations from increasing. I'm not opposed to providing additional funding in the area of foster care, but I would be really reluctant to see that we start playing with those numbers if we're going to be making, taking dollars away from areas where we can really support children where they are. And yes, and I hear what you're saying about after-school mentoring and foster care, but I mean, even the mentoring and after-school programs, I think, can be holistic in a way that can help children, and certainly can include children who are in foster care. They're not being excluded from those opportunities. So I went back and looked at how we did with foster care allocations in our last funding cycle. And if I'm correct, there were several new programs. Is that, or not several, but there were new initiatives, or not new initiatives, but the organizations that were providing the services were, for the most part, new. Is that correct?
I don't know if the organizations were new
Not the
necessarily.
organizations, but how they were addressing this,
There were definitely new programs that applied in foster care. In other words, programs that didn't exist prior to us
Okay.
funding them.
Okay.
The agency or the set of services that the agency might be delivering were there beforehand.
right.
In some cases, it was an increasing or expanding a program that already existed. In some cases, it was a new program.
okay.
So it
okay,
was kind of a mix, I'd say.
Okay, all
Am I
right,
correct in that, Lisa?
all right.
So I'm sorry, were you
No,
done?
go ahead.
You sure? Okay. I just want to speak to some of the dysfunctionality in our state. And that's maybe a little far afield, but I happen to agree with Mitch for a different reason. And that is, I spent a lot of my day talking about homelessness and the people living on our streets. And when you look at the youth on our streets, an awful lot of them are coming from the foster care system. That is a failure upstream of the foster care system, in my opinion. I believe every kid should have a transition plan from foster care into either employment or to housing or to some other stabilized position, and they don't. And on one hand, I want to spend more of the resource on addressing this population that we're seeing on our streets, because it's a serious population and it's a group of kids who they've fallen through the cracks. I mean, they have literally fallen through the cracks. And we have failed to create a system that gives them the transition they deserve. On the other hand, I'm reluctant to continue to take up the slack for a failed foster care system at the local level. I'm tired of it because we're playing catch up on mental health, we're playing catch up on addiction services, we're playing catch up on a whole host of other areas where we keep spreading our capacity to do the kinds of things that we can do thinner and thinner and thinner at the local level. So maybe there's an opportunity to take a look at this in a shorter term time frame, because I see it as a crisis on the streets, but back it up with a real acknowledgement that we're going to continue to work and move upstream to address this issue. We can't keep holding up, we can't just keep holding up the entire safety net system at the local level. We're really, really lucky and fortunate that we have this resource, and you, Lisa, and Commissioner Saltzman and others who paved the way for it. We're lucky that we have it, but we should also expect the rest of the system to do its job too.
I mean, the recent audit that was from DHS, I think, and the lawsuits that have come out of it, I think people are trying to do that.
It was
It's just,
unattractive. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are trying to move the levers that they have, but I agree, there's not, I mean, it's been very slow to no progress, even at this date. I think it's kind of up to you about what you see as the best way to address that. I mean, I think some of what came through in the child abuse prevention, kind of to Julie's point from community engagement, was we need to be able to stabilize families so they don't get involved with child welfare. That's such a huge need, and DHS doesn't have enough resources to do that either. So I think, it's both and usually.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Holden Caulfield moment, isn't it? Are you making a proposal? I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I totally agree with you, Mr. Mayor. And the reality is, foster care is a feeder, and we're going to pay for them when they're homeless adults on our streets. So I could argue that it's a good investment, but I too, like you, could not be more frustrated with Salem and its lack of resources and support for not just the wards of the underage kids, but just all of the struggling communities, not just Portland, that are struggling to provide a safety net. So I appreciate what Julie says, but I'd still like to see some more money addressed to the foster kids.
I think the dilemma is when you look at the way it's set up for foster kids, there isn't any other state agency that depends on volunteers to make it successful, right? When you look at a foster kid needs families, and name any other agency within the state that requires that level of volunteer commitment. And one of the reasons I happen to agree with Mitch is there needs to be more innovation and thought of serving a population that can't advocate for itself. And so I get where Mitch is coming from. I don't know what the answer is, but I happen to agree with you. Because I'm not saying the state, we've been in crisis, but do we leave the 11,500 kids without something? And so I went back and looked as well at the funding sources as well, Julie, and I think there has to be some sort of cross-collaboration that we can do, but Mitch, I support you on this one. There has to be something more. We can't keep looking at the papers, especially when we have this resource that, we have these amazing nonprofits in this county that are so good at serving our young people. And so I understand where you're coming from. There is that dilemma. Mayor, you're right. And coming out of housing, you're right. If we don't address, it's just going to be more and more young people on the streets. We're going to pay for it somewhere.
So I appreciate, first of all, the work that the staff did in getting us to this point and having a starting point to have this discussion. And I really support everything that's been said, in terms of, I think the critical nature that our foster care system is in this state, and I know that there's work being done right now to try to address it, but it feels like we're, getting water out of the boat with a teaspoon when it's really, there's a whole, the whole boat is sinking. But I think that based on what you were saying, or what was said earlier, Lisa, in terms of the after-school program, the bump there, really looking at some of the transportation needs and an estimate about what that might entail. We don't know exactly what that is going to be, so there might be some wiggle room there. And then the child abuse with the additional, we have the additional program that we supported, in terms of that. I mean, there might be some area there. What I don't want to see, though, is for us to cut the budget for any one area below what it was in the last granting cycle. I think that would be, I would like to see some increase for all of them in that way, but there may be some room to maneuver, I think, in some of the areas.
Does anyone have a proposal how you prefer to divide it?
Well, just to throw another idea in, I would be comfortable taking our unallocated down from 1.65 to 1 and throwing it into the allocated, and I totally agree with you, nobody should back up. So what we're really talking about is spreading the new money. So we just have to figure out what we want to, I would personally like to see hunger relief and mentoring not just be held harmless, but have some of the new money, but just move foster care up to, a more robust allocation without penalizing them. And so, however, I don't know, we can send you back and you guys can, do some.
The allowance in the law essentially is up to 10% unallocated, so we just cut that, slightly under.
Right, that's why.
But if you don't want, you don't have to leave 10%.
I was just trying to make it
non-competitive. I'm
easier.
sorry, to non-competitive.
Right.
That's more of a choice. So again, we were leaving some there in case you want to increase. In November, we'll be able to bring the community child care initiative to you for a whole review and then look ahead on that one. We want to try to tackle that in this meeting, but we were leaving some resource in case people want to change the level that they're supporting childcare, because that was the number one priority in early childhood. But the way that we address that priority is through that community child care initiative, which supports networks, child care networks, provider networks, as well as providing subsidy for parents to get quality care. So that's kind of, that's where that's essentially, why we were holding that out. We will still be able to fund that at the same level, even taking this resource from there. So I'm not rendering an opinion, I'm just telling you that's what it is.
Well, as I look at the numbers, if we moved foster care up to 15% of the recommended allocation, and we move the 650,000 out of the unallocated, mentoring and hunger relief would still have robust increases.
Yeah, you're going to change the pie, so the percentages are going to look different
Right,
if you
but
add to the
they're-
pie.
But
So
just
I
in
can't tell you what.
straight real dollars, they're going to be moving, they're going to have, you know, probably still close to $2 million increase for mentoring and more than that for hunger relief if we
Yeah, I mean, those numbers would be the same in terms of, or approximately in terms of increase. If you add to the pie, it's just gonna, you just want to make sure whatever's added gets added to foster care, is what I hear you saying.
Well, I'm also talking about, I don't think 650 would be enough. So I'm talking about taking the 650 plus 1 or 2 basis points from mentoring and hunger relief, whatever it takes to get foster care up to 15%. And whatever that works out to be, my point was mentoring and hunger relief will still see robust increases in their allocations.
If you take mentoring down
No,
further,
no.
that's
So
going to be.
right now, it's 9%, right? Am I reading this right? And
Yep.
the current investment is 4.8 million over 3 years. And if we give it 9% in this new budget, it'll be 6.1 million. So that's a robust increase, right? So
27%.
yeah, so if we change that to 8% or 7.5%, it's going to drop its increase from 27% to 20-something percent. So still, what I'm saying is a robust increase and hunger relief, the numbers will even work out bigger than that. So again, all I'm saying is if we move foster care to a 15% increase, no program is getting held back. Nobody is going to lose money compared to where they stand this year. The only way you could quote unquote say they're losing money is from your staff's proposed increases. Right?
Okay, so the thing, all right, I mean, I could sit here and maybe the wise thing to do is to sit here and make sure I work out all the numbers on a spreadsheet and come back at the end of the meeting and vote on it, because I'm thinking I want to make sure, because you're changing the pie. No? Don't want to do that? Oh, you're just,
Are you
you're
reading
looking
my
at face-
mind?
No, I was just trying to read your mind.
I'm good with that.
Okay, because I was just thinking, I want to make sure that I understand, because we're trying to go publish in 2 weeks, and we want to be able to divide the resources how you
Yeah,
want them
that would be-
divided.
that would be
And I
very
want everybody
helpful.
to understand what those numbers look like before you actually had to take a vote. And so I think maybe I would want to run that before I have you do that.
Yeah,
Is that okay?
that'd be helpful if you don't
Okay.
mind.
All right, how about we hold that? We'll go quickly with a computer, run this, and we'll have Meg and Lisa tell you about the other decisions you have to make, which are around the RFI, more of the text and the scoring and the things that are not about the money.
So if I could ask Lisa, since we had a pretty lengthy discussion since the last time I asked if anybody wanted to testify on this matter, let's ask again now that we've had that conversation. Is there anybody who wants to testify? Yeah, come on up.
Okay.
Should we ask for math majors?
Yes. We should get some free math help.
Hi, my name is Dr. Joseph Tietz. I'm the Executive Director of Pathfinders, and we're a recipient of services not in the foster care area, but in the criminal justice. I am a foster parent, and I've worked for a national foster youth organization, and I do think that the state of Oregon has done an abysmal job in sort of allocating the resources appropriately. So my concern is it's, just by blunt instrument of adding dollars without sort of that sort of dichotomy and dilemma that you were talking about in terms of holding them accountable. I know that the Casey Family Programs, which is a national organization that partners with states and also with with NGO, nonprofit organizations, work in terms of systemic innovation. Is there a way, and I don't want to be presumptuous, Lisa, to ask, is there a way to do like an innovation matching grant or some sort of something during the course of a year that just doesn't throw money but says, okay, we want the PCL is prepared to allocate additional resources provided the state comes up with X, Y, and Z. And that may not be the purview of PCL to get in that kind of complicated equation. But I know that in California, we did that with some counties, and those counties that were able to generate resources received innovation grants. And then they set the example for other counties to do the same. And that was matched with other dollars. So it's sort of a hybrid of holding some accountability. Don't know if that's possible in Oregon or if that's even within your purview, but just thought I'd share it.
Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, so we'll have Lisa and Meg then come up and discuss some of the features of the draft RFIs, which have been on the Levy website for a number of days for review. I think it's been up since, what, last week?
Yeah,
Give or
September
take?
10th.
Okay,
Yes.
good. And again, after any questions, we'll open this up to public discussion as well, public comment. Good afternoon.
Great, thank you. Is this on? Yes. So at this point in the meeting, we'll be asking for your approval on the program area requests for investments, or RFIs. Before we get into all this, we'll provide a brief overview of the RFI work that's been done to this point. Then we'll discuss the distribution of the remaining points in the program area RFIs and how those were distributed, and then give an overview of the RFI instructions that have been prepared. As the mayor said, you'll have a chance to ask staff questions and hear discussion among yourself, also hear public testimony before you make decisions about this. So just a bit of background. In June, the committee approved the templates, Section 1 and Section 2, and the score forms. Section 3 of the templates was not yet prepared, and so over the summer, staff has prepared that section and also the score forms that go with that. Using the completed templates, staff has created the program area RFIs that were posted last week, and also developed the RFI instructions. As already has been mentioned, those have been posted, and allocation committee members also received those materials last week. Staff had intended to have a written feedback opportunity for the public to comment, but given the short timeline and turnaround and amount of work that went into developing those program area RFIs, there simply wasn't enough time, but you will have an opportunity to hear public input today. And after today's meeting, hopefully with the RFIs all approved, they will be published on September 25th. So, and to refresh everyone's memory, there are 3 sections in the RFI. The first section is organizational capacity and commitment to racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. That section of the RFI is worth 36 points. The second section is proven program design and effectiveness, and that area is worth 54 points. And the third section is program budget and budget narrative, worth a maximum of 10 points, for a total score possible of 100 points for each application or RFI. The one section that has been customized in each of the 4 program areas is in Section 2, the proven program design and effectiveness. And the template included 50 points. And so there were 4 additional points that could be customized for each program area. And those 4 points were used to address the program area features and or any other unique areas or anything else unique to that program area. On page 4 of each of the RFIs is a list of the desired program features. And just as a reminder, those features came through from the community engagement that was done. So the kinds of things that you find in the features are focus on specific populations, the language and the culture of staff, how programs are incorporating participant voice, adult-to-child ratios, service hours, and transportation, as well as staff training for the particular program areas. So those are the common kinds of things that you see in the features. So in the materials that you received and also on the back of the agendas is a chart that shows you where the breakdown of how those 4 points in each program area were spread. And we were going to have the slide up there, but so sorry, people at home viewing. So we have the first column is the subsections of that section 2, and then the template points are the next column. It will show, shows what the maximum points were from the template, and then each of the program areas are in the columns to the right, and you can see where there's a difference or variance from the template. You'll notice that the point differences in the subsections vary more in hunger relief, and that's primarily because in hunger relief, we're not requiring the programs to report on outcomes or participation or minimum dosage in those program areas, because we're really looking at people getting the resource, if they're getting access to the food, and they're coming to get those services when they need those services. So instead, we're looking at the amount and type of food resources that are provided, the number of people that are accessing those resources, usage patterns, and attendance at workshops or classes that may be offered. Additionally, a really important piece of hunger relief is the outreach and making sure that people in the community are aware of the resource and how to access those resources. So that's more the focus in that program area, RFI. Questions about how the points were distributed or how we went about doing that? Okay, I'll turn it over to Meg.
Thanks. All right, so with each of the draft RFI documents that are out there, there are basically two parts. There's a set of instructions, and there are four discrete kind of pieces within those instructions, and then there are the RFI questions and some other materials that people will be expected to submit. So Lisa just went over the sort of RFI questions and those three sections that comprise the applications that we'll receive, and I'm going to talk about the instructions that guide applicants through how they need to complete and submit their applications and what they can expect through the funding process. So the instructions are really the way in which we are operationalizing and communicating to applicants many of the decisions that you all made this spring. So I'll walk you through what that looks like. So as I noted, there are four parts to the instructions. The first part looks at a general background on the levy itself and outlines the program area strategies that will be considered that applicants can apply to submit, they can apply for funding in that program area. The second section walks them through funding requirements. The third section is how to submit an application and what the required components are. And the fourth process outlines the funding process. So I'm going to highlight now kind of the main things that folks need to know and that you all will want to know about each of those four parts. So in the background section and the part that describes the program area strategies, it helps applicants understand who the Portland Children's Levy is generally. And for each program area, it gives the applicants some data points from our last 2014 competitive funding process so that they can understand contextually what kind of the applicant pool looked like, the total amount of money requested compared to what was funded, the average amount of funding that was awarded to a given applicant. Again, we had some slides prepared to walk you through those levy level data, but we don't have them, but some of the things I remember off the top of my head, in 2014, we received 122 applications and funded 59 of them. There were for every $1 requested, for every $1 we were able to award, there were $2.54 requested, which is so we basically funded 39% of what was requested based on available resources. And on average, an applicant received 71% of their request. So we have sort of some program area stats in each of the RFIs to help people kind of understand what it looked like last time. And knowing that based on whatever resource decision you make at the end of this meeting will again inform sort of what applicants decide to ask for. And then also in that section of the instructions are the specific program area strategies that applicants can apply for funding and those program area features that we're looking for in any given strategy. And that informed the distribution of those 4 points in each program area. The second section on funding requirements helps applicants understand the minimum and maximum annual grant amount that they can apply for. The minimum is $65,000 annually, and the maximum is $675,000 annually, and those are based on the 2014 minimum and maximum grant levels that were set by the allocation committee at that time, plus increases over time for the cost of doing business. Total levy requests by any applicant agency cannot exceed 30% of their organizational revenues from the last closed fiscal year. That means that for an organization who wants a minimum grant, they have to have at least $270,000 in organizational revenues from the last closed fiscal year. The funding requirements section also outlines the age range of the eligible service population, which varies by different program areas. The requirement that beneficiaries of the funds be residents of the city of Portland indicates that the grants are for a 3-year period. discusses which kinds of organizations are eligible to apply and informs applicants that they will, if they're successful, they will have to adhere to City of Portland contract agreement requirements like liability insurance levels and equal opportunity employment regulations. The third section of the RFI instructions details to applicants how they can submit their applications and helps remind them of all the materials that are necessary for their submission. And then the fourth section really details out for them what the funding process will look like. So that's the part where we have tried to communicate to applicants many of the policy decisions that you made in the spring. It helps applicants understand how they can submit questions while they're preparing their applications to Levy staff and how we'll respond to them and how we'll share those written questions and responses widely to all potential applicants. It walks them through how the review and scoring process will operate. It communicates to them how staff will use, which criteria staff will use to make their recommendations, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It reminds them and describes for them that they may offer testimony about their application in a written format and a video format and how that will be done. It outlines that advocacy with you all is prohibited during the funding process, so once we publish the RFI until you make your funding decisions. It lets them know that final funding decisions are at the approval of Portland City Council. It reminds them of public meeting law requirements, which you all are subject to, and informs them how they'll be notified of their award if they're successful. Also included in the instructions is a set of definitions for the demographics tables that applicants will complete in different parts of their application. Any questions on that before I talk a little bit about our staff recommendations criteria? Excellent. So one of the recommendations that came out of the PSU team that reviewed our grant-making process was to be more transparent about the criteria that staff will use to make their funding recommendations next spring. So we published that in the RFI, or we have in the draft, and we are, our main criteria or our main priorities will be to recommend highest scoring applications in the program area and balancing the portfolio of investments so that we're ideally addressing all of the program area strategies and all the priority populations. So we may not always recommend a highest scoring application depending on how well it speaks to a balanced portfolio. Other reasons we might not recommend a high scoring application or why we might elevate a lower scoring application have to do with the following types of reasons. If the applicant doesn't meet some of the funding requirements that are published in the RFI, as I said, if we're trying to balance the offering of service strategies that are proposed and assure access for services across priority populations, if we're concerned about the scale of the proposed program being inconsistent with the organization's experience, if there's rapid or large-scale expansion proposed, or if there's unclear, minimal, or limited experience operating the proposed program, particularly with the proposed population. If the program is substantially higher in cost per participant than similarly proposed programs, if the applicant is a past PCL grantee, and if we have serious programmatic performance concerns, or if they've done an excellent job, those things might come into consideration. And then in foster care, we also have a criteria about how the applicant demonstrates adequate connection to DHS child welfare, since that's a necessary part of success to those programs. And then our staff's recommendations about amount to fund for each applicant that is recommended will have to do on the applicant's total grant request, whether we as a staff are recommending all of the service components that the applicant proposed, the scale of expansion that the applicant proposed, and again, making sure that we have a range of services for various priority populations in the program area. Any questions on those criteria? All right. It's a lot that we just covered, so public testimony options are limitless.
Very good. Who'd like to testify? And Lisa, did we get the math done on the allocation? Sorry? Okay, any further discussion on this item? All right, so we have presentation, and we'll need a vote on the key features of the draft RFIs, is that correct?
Yes, it would be great if you could vote essentially on the drafts of the program area RFIs that we provided to you.
Okay, and just for clarification, voting on the draft, then what's the next step?
Next step is finalizing the amounts that you will allocate to the program areas, because that will go into the RFI.
Okay,
And then
so
we'll
by
publish.
voting, we are making these the final RFIs, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, very good.
Thank you for that clarification.
I'll entertain a motion in a second.
So moved.
Second.
You have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, vote aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Back to the math.
You guys.
We'll just put the spreadsheet up on, so people can see it. I think that's easier. I mean, if you can read it, that might be dubious, but we'll do our best.
You just had it.
Thanks.
Oh, we saw it.
We saw it for a brief minute.
There we
There
go.
it is.
There we go. Okay, so you can see some of it. Yeah, maybe if you just took the size down a touch, maybe in the corner, will that change it, the display, or no? On the right-hand side, just to minus the size a little bit,
Here.
and you can see them all, maybe? Okay. Okay, there you go.
Is that legible?
Can you read it? I know that's
I
taxing
mean, we have to
eyesight.
talk you through it, but
So the pie was made bigger, that's what the first step was, to add the resources that Mitch, so just to be clear where we are coming from, staff took 10% of the non-competitive you were allowed to allocate 10% non-competitively for those sets of initiatives. So there was money in that category that Mitch wants to move out of that category and put it in the competitive round. Okay, so taking that 650,000, that was added to this, 1.65 million, added to the pie, and then applying the percentages that you suggested, Mitch, which was, so keeping child abuse and early childhood the same, decreasing hunger relief and mentoring by a point, decreasing after school by 3 points, and increasing foster care to 15%. You have the results over on the right, okay? So the percentage increase, each category of funding is still increased, as you can see where John's pointing there. The increases in after-school and mentoring are small. They're gonna bump up against inflation, depending on what, inflation/COLA. But still, the category is the dollars would be increasing. You're gonna be increasing foster care investments almost by 100% doing that.
And if the committee wants to look, what I'm doing is page 4 is a good comparison of our notes. So you can go back to 2014, so you can really see the allocation that Lisa's talking about. And for the audience, it's page 4, that's what we're comparing.
Well, you have a memo, and they just have the
Oh,
agenda.
Sorry,
are you talking about?
I'm
what-
looking here.
What
The
the
original one was.
Maybe I can.
Are you talking about the percentages that were awarded in the previous?
Yeah,
So that's the
I'm
last 6 years.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
looking, comparing to make sure
Yeah.
that we
So
haven't lowered
just to
anything.
refresh people's memory, because we did put that slide up before. The percentages, again, this is looking over the 6-year period. Keeping in mind, we had actuals, and then we have just what the grants are for this year. So you got a mix of numbers there. But those percentages was 34.8 for early childhood, 18.4 for child abuse, 18.4 for after school, 10.2 for foster care, mentoring 9.7, hunger relief 8.6. So those were that's what was allocated last time. I mean, when hunger relief was a new program area, the committee allocated fewer resources because they didn't know what to expect. They weren't sure what kinds of programs would come forward. They weren't sure what sort of needs would evidence. So that, I think, was deliberate on the committee's part in terms of allocating a smaller amount. We did hear in community engagement that people prioritized that, and so that, staff made their recommendations based on that.
I have a question, looking at either the back of the agenda or page 4. early childhood really shouldn't have any difference, right, between what we're looking at and what's on this spreadsheet?
No, it would because the pie is larger. The
Oh.
dollar amounts would be different because remember, you've increased the pie. The percentage is the same, but the dollar amount is different because we've made the pie larger.
Okay.
From 68.7 to 69,350.
Yeah, if you look,
Okay,
so
so-
if I look at, when we had the pie smaller, before we added the money that Mitch wanted to add, and early childhood was at 31%, the total investment would be 21,297. And there it's 21,498, because it's the same percentage of a larger.
Yeah, so Mitch, was your intention to add the addition to the whole pie or add it directly to foster care?
To foster care.
That,
That's different than what we did.
I hesitate to,
Okay, so you want to add, you want to take the money, you want to put it in foster care. That's a difficult to do percentages in that function that way.
Could do it. Take a minute again.
I'm not sure what okay. How do you want to do that mathematically? Because that's like a special ad for one category.
Fine, we'll do it like this.
Okay.
and the reason I say that is because then I think that the hit to hunger relief and isn't as hard if we're not making the whole pie bigger and changing the percentages, but if we're just,
making one pie bigger.
yeah, and it might not be
One segment of the pie.
15% then, but it would still be additional dollars that
So if
foster
you-
care hadn't had previously.
So,
well,
okay, so you
we'd
can plug
still
in.
have to, I think, with the numbers, because it goes, to get to 10, it's, well, like Lisa said, it's almost doubling, so it would have, and that's only $650,000, so we got to use some of this allocation to move it substantially. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but I think that, for me, how you explained it in my head, I was thinking that the percentage, for instance, for early childhood would go down slightly,
I know what you mean.
like it would come down equally from different percentages.
It's taking a different approach to allocating the funds, honestly. I'm not sure that we're going to get this to work really easily right here because the way that, that the committee has approached it in the past was to take the pool of resources and divide it by percentage. That was kind of the way that they approached it. And that's sort of what the law directs you to do, is to divide up the money between program areas. So if you're looking at dollars versus a percentage, that's going to change how you do it. So, we have typically looked at percentages, not dollars, because keeping in mind that dollars change. The economist projections are rarely right. I mean, they're usually off one way or another, behind or ahead. So, percentages kind of keeps you in line, keeps your priorities in line, regardless of how the dollars might change. Because we're going to get another forecast in January. I can't say these dollars are going to be exactly the same. So you can do dollars, but you have that's your danger, okay? So you could instead just look at, instead of doing percentages as they look at here, we can sort of, I don't know how you would do it. It's like we'd have to
Well,
structure
what I
it
just
differently.
did is just added the 650 to foster care, and that's the new set of percentages, and we'll make those yellow. Or, yeah, we'll go the yellow with those. And then the percent increase on the far right is still accurate. So we could, it's kind of a complicated problem. We could move dollars around in buckets and see what it does to percentages. That's just throwing the 650 in, so that gives you that.
Okay. So you're at 11%.
Bumps it to 11.
So it bumps it to 11. I guess that's what I was hearing, is you wanted it 15. So it sounds, would you be I heard you say two things. You wanted the additional 650,000, plus you wanted it added up to 15%. So that's what I'm trying to get at.
well, I was just trying to find the money to get it to 15. So could I live with this? Yeah, because it's better than it was. Would I like to see foster care a little higher? Yes, I would. So I don't know how the rest of the committee feels.
Would you be willing to wait to see what your field of applicants is? To try to, in other words, you have the chance to move money around once you look at the field of applicants in the decision-making meetings, which is what happened last time. So not huge amounts of money, but people moved, there was.
There was definitely, I would say.
$300,000 sometimes between categories.
Yes.
I would. Of a particular grant.
Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to kind of just remind everyone is that the category of child abuse prevention and intervention includes intervention. So you could consider sort of seeing which applications come in that category, as well as foster care, and thinking about how to balance those two portfolios of investment together, considering the issues that are being raised. That's just another option.
I would also comment that I appreciate the person speaking from the community, thank you, about possibly finding out if there are other ways that we might be able to leverage or support funding. And considering that this could be something that is in our non-competitive grants area, that, I mean, there still is a way to say that we can support foster care opportunities that may be coming forward elsewhere in the community. Because yes, there are conversations, because fortunately, we're not the only ones who are fed up with how things are. So there may be an opportunity that we don't know of yet.
And that's partly why those resources are held there for that
Yes,
exact issue. So you're
exactly.
correct, and there's
Exactly.
nothing that would prohibit you from doing that.
Right.
So Mitch, would you be happy as a compromise if we left it this at 11% and then when we go to the allocation round, seeing about moving it around after that, since we just learned that we can still do that as well?
I would.
Okay.
So I assume that's a motion, Mitch?
So moved.
There's a second.
I'll second.
Very good. Further discussion? Anybody have a burning desire to testify on this matter before we cast a vote? Seeing none, all in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, so we have our allocation and we have our 6 RFIs. We're making good progress here today. So this will be a good way to segue into the next item. Lisa's going to review the funding timeline and tell us.
Just Lisa.
Oh, Lisa's going to review the funding timelines and tell us a little bit about the next steps. Good afternoon again.
Nothing to vote on with this, just
Very
an
good.
update here. So, as we mentioned a couple times now, the RFI will publish on September 25th. Thank you all for your approvals. We'll have 2 pre-proposal conferences on October 9th and 10th for the applicants or potential applicants to come and learn more about the RFIs and specifically to ask questions of staff at that time. The applications will be due on November 20th, right before Thanksgiving. We will have reviewer trainings at the beginning of December, and the review period will go through the end of January. Staff recommendations will go to applicants as well as the allocation committee by March 1st. And applicants will have the opportunity for testimony, both written and video, in March and early April, with funding decisions being made at 2 funding decision meetings in April. And the updated timeline has been posted to our website this morning. So that, all that information is there. So any questions or comments about the timeline? No? All right,
Good.
that one was easy. That was my easiest allocation committee.
All right, very good.
presentation. So, and then the next, your
Nope,
turn.
go ahead.
Your turn.
No, please.
Okay, so the next item is an update about the reviewer recruitment. And so after the process was, you all approved the process last spring, we started doing recruitment through social media and also through our newsletter. And the process includes an online application or sign-up form where we ask potential volunteers to share information about their experience with equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as the program areas that PCL funds. To date, we have 25 people in the reviewer pool, and we'll begin our focused outreach later this month. And just as a reminder, we anticipate needing about 75 to 80 reviewers. The actual number will depend on applications that we receive in each of the funding areas.
Very
That's an
good.
update with that. If you don't have questions, I'll turn it over to Meg for an update on the hiring process of the small grants manager.
Fantastic, thank you. Hello again, Meg.
Well, hello. So happily, we are making great progress with welcoming a new position into the Children's Levy team. Our small grants manager position recruitment period closed. And based on how City Human Resources set up that process, we did receive 75 applications. So they are reviewing those for minimum qualifications, and then they'll send them on to us. First round of interviews will be the end of September, the week of the 30th. A second round of interviews will take place the week of October 14th, and we hope to have the new small grants manager on board by the next allocation committee meeting on November 4th. Wow. And so just as you all catch your breaths and wrap up this big competitive process next spring, that person will probably be coming to you poised to make a whole new set of policy decisions and set parameters for a small grants funding round. So exciting times ahead.
Very good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'd like to thank everybody from Levy staff for planning and executing the upcoming RFI process. This is all very exciting. And I want to thank Julie again for a tremendous service. It's not enough just to say thank you for the time and the energy and the passion you've put into this. But in lieu of a big bonus check, that's what we've got for you today. We're keeping it honest. Yeah, we're keeping it honest all the way to the end. And of course, for those of you who are interested, and I assume most of you didn't come for the good humor, the Levy will have the RFIs and other information posted on the website. When would you say, Lisa, next week? I'm sorry? On the 25th, so look for that. And for my colleagues, minus Julie, which is kind of sad, we'll meet next on November 4th. Thank you for your service. Why don't you hit the gavel? Yay! Yay! You did some good.
Well done.